Oh, thank you. Oh, you have.
Thank you.
You have a.
I have a lapel mic, but that's for video stuff. The power works. I'm going to just do quickly something before I start. I just want to make sure I've got my timer running. Time boxes are pretty useful. So I'll just put this guy out here in case you were wondering where I was from. He's real. Like many things in Australia, we made him in China. Oh yeah, look. So you know when you're on the stage and you're giving a talk, people often take photographs of you. So everybody smile. Thank you. That was beautiful. You guys at the back were really working that. Right. Enough me just carrying on. And that moment where I realised I left my water bottle down there and I'm going to need to drink that in a couple of seconds when I just completely evaporate. So, science for teams. Well, kind of. What I'm going to do is talk about 4 things to do with teams, rather than the whole gambit of science around teams, which is pretty big. I've got a new initiative which is called Science for Teams, and those who come to the workshop tomorrow are going to get a taster of what's involved in that. But the reason why I'm doing this is because if you hadn't noticed or you hadn't experienced it, Agile runs on teams. Now, if you're using Scrum, then you will have a Scrum team and a development team. If you don't have a Scrum team and a development team, then you're not doing Scrum. Sorry to be a bit black and white about that. Get your act together, do it properly. Now, if you're using extreme programming or using any other flavour, you've got a team somewhere. And one of the things I've found from coaching and one of the things I've found with working is that the understanding of teams is pretty limited. So I started doing a bit of research, dug through papers and had a look at what we could possibly want to know. Because, as some French guy said, nothing is more dangerous than an idea when it is the only idea that you have. So the goal of this talk is to give you 4 more ideas. Someone once pointed out that there's more than 4 ideas in this talk. So I think there's about 7, maybe 8, but let's just stick with 4, we'll chunk it up. So we're going to talk about, I'm going to talk about development models, so what happens with teams over time. What are the motivational effects when people work in teams? Things change when you're in a group. What happens when a team is outcome focused versus process focused? And then finally I'm going to talk about leadership because everyone loves leadership. There's some kind of secret mystical thing about it. So I'm chucking that in there to keep you happy. But before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about this. And just check, Cesario, can you read the slides? It's okay? Good. Here's my quality control. So if we're going to talk about a team, let's give a definition of a team. This is an old definition. This is from the last century. This is from 1997. So a team, a collection of individuals who are interdependent in their tasks, who share responsibility for outcomes, who see themselves and are seen by others as an intact social entity embedded in one or more larger social systems, and who manage their relationships across organisational boundaries. Now, I'm going to turn that off and you're going to tell me exactly what that said. Okay? Let's go. Oh, wrong button. No, it's not working. We'll have to move on. Okay, so nice academic definition. So we can boil that down, I think, to thinking about teams as individuals. So don't think of a team as like this clump of stuff. It's these individual people who you need to work with. And that's pretty important because if you've read, what's it called, Agile Manifesto, that's old too. But it says something about individuals and interactions. That seems to be considered important. So it's worthwhile looking at that. Now, the other thing with the teams is those individuals have an interdependence. They rely on each other for their work. So you need to think about that when you're working with teams as well. And again, there needs to be a shared responsibility about those people. So you need to have an agreement or an understanding or a desire to work with each other and to get something done. And what have we got left? Identity, wonderful abstract term. You need to be able to see a team and think that is actually a team. So you also need to think of yourself as being part of a team. So it's another little litmus test for you. Do I see that group of people and do I go, yes, that's team X working on blah? If you don't get that feeling, then ask yourself a question, is it a team? And finally, the team sits inside something else. It sits inside your organisation. Or it might be part of a feature group or something like that. Or it might be in the market. So you've got some boundary within the team. Pay attention to that. Okay, enough of that. Let's move on to the actual content. Can you chuck me that water? Water, just right, no, water, yeah, okay. Thank you. Sorry, as you can see, I'm incredibly well prepared. I'd blame jet lag, but it's just how I work. Okay, let's get stuck into development models. So, what's a model? So before we talk about what a development model is, it's probably worthwhile understanding what this model thing is that I'm going to talk about. So we're just going layer upon layer of weird meta stuff. So Graziano and Roland describe models as simplified, analogical descriptions of the real world. A real world that is far more complex than we can write down, than we can describe. So what we kind of can't quite see here is there's a picture of a nice delta wing aircraft, and there's a picture of a delta wing paper aeroplane. So the paper aeroplane is a model of a real aeroplane, and we can learn stuff from using a paper aeroplane about flight. We probably can't learn enormous amounts about ejector seats, but we can learn something about that. So they're useful, but they're not the whole thing. As a matter of fact, those two things are pictures, and we can learn stuff from pictures, but again, the picture isn't reality. So I'm going to talk to you about two development models for teams, but know that they are not real. They are just one way of understanding your teams and how you can work with them. Okay, so I'm going to start by talking about Tuchman's model from 1965 and then Poole's model from 1983. Does anyone heard of Tuchman's model? Yep, a few of you? Cool, okay, so that's going to be nicely grounded for you. Anyone heard of Poole's multiple sequence model? No, you're just brushing your hair. I had hopes. Okay, so Tuchman, 1965 was when this was published. Really interesting paper. You can get it using the power of Google. It's worthwhile reading, probably a bit painful in places, but not too bad. So Tuchman had a look through a whole bunch of studies. Rather than doing like experimental research, it's all paper-based, which is how I roll. And was interested in finding whether groups changed in a particular way. He actually had a feeling about this anyway. He had an idea and he was looking through the papers to see what he actually found. And one of the things he found is most of the stuff that was published was from therapy. So clinical settings, people who need help rather than people who are working. There's a little bit of lab stuff and there's a little bit of natural setting, but most of the stuff was from therapy. Keep that in mind. And he proposed these 4 stages of development. This is 1965. In 1977, he chucked an extra stage on the end. So we have a forming stage, we have the storming, we have the norming, and we have the performing, and then he put on adjourning, which to an American, I guess, is adjourning, so it rhymes, which is nice. So we've got this really nice linear sequence of how teams work together. So they get to know each other, they kind of meet, then they have a bit of a power struggle, which is the storming phase, and then when that sorts out, we work out what our actual roles are when we norm, and then we actually get on with the job of performing, and eventually the team splits up, or the group splits up, and that's what the adjourning phase is. So it's nice, it's clean, we go bang, 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 bang. Okay. So if we use this to work with our teams and we're trying to improve what's going on with the team, or we're trying to understand what's happening with the team so we can find some kind of improvement, are there problems with using this? Well, potentially none. So if you start a new team, new company, you hire a new bunch of people with a startup or something, they've never worked together before. They have what's called zero history. So they will have to learn to get to know each other. If a team splits up, then they do adjourn. There's that point where the team breaks up. if you do stuff really well, the team will perform and produce stuff, which is fantastic. So there's certainly some truth in here. But I think what's worthwhile keeping in mind is that I'm going to assume that none of you work in therapy. It might feel like it. You might feel like you're working with some very dysfunctional people who need a lot of help, lots of nods. But you're not there to do that, right? There are times you might want to cry or punch someone, but you're not there for therapy. You're there to produce some kind of product. And that's the world we work in. Tuchman's work is based on therapy. He's looking at what happens in therapy groups. And that's worthwhile keeping in mind. I've got a little quote, which is, he thinks that you need to limit the understanding to what happens in therapy groups based on this. And also Tuchman gave examples where the sequence didn't occur or stages were left out. So just like those of you who've gone back and read, is it Royce's waterfall paper? Anyone read that? Winston Royce's paper? 1, 2, 3, 4, yeah, okay. You'll see that that paper is not what we've done in software for a long time. If we'd actually done that, we probably wouldn't have even started the whole Agile movement. It would have been a very different world. And equally, if you go and read Tuchman, you'll see that there are things that are different to the way people use this model. So one of the things that I wanted to go back to the philosophical point that if you only have one idea, then it's a bit dangerous. If you've only got Tuchman to work with, then you'll keep mapping your ideas onto Tuchman. We're having an argument about something, oh, we must be storming. Maybe we're just having a discussion about an architectural point, and it's worthwhile having that argument. We're not storming, there's no power relationship here. What we're trying to do is decide what's the best way to go forward. And I think it should be X, someone else should think it's Y. That's life. So just be aware of it. Okay, let's talk about Poole's model. So Poole published 3 very interesting papers around 1983. Again, I think you can get them through Google. I don't know if they're actually open sourced or not. Maybe I'm recommending piracy to you. They're hard work, so I don't necessarily recommend them to you. If you have trouble sleeping, find them, boom, gone. Anyway, so through the research, you found that, I keep going to put this down, I feel weird having 2 things in my hand, that groups exhibited different stage development. Now he was studying decision making in groups. So he would put a group together, they would have to make a decision about something, and he was mapping out what happened during that time together. So it wasn't a long period of time that he was looking at, it was just this short sequence. That's going to be great on the video, Lachlan drinking. Okay, so Poole's model. So in contrast to the stage model of Tuchman, where we go from one stage to the next, and the sequences occur in a nice order, Poole suggested that there are 3 ways to understand what's going on. There's this thing called activity tracks, which I'll explain in a second. There's breakpoints, which are changes in activity tracks, and then there's this overall structure that you need to have in place for your team to be effective, or for your group to be effective. So activity tracks are kind of the main game here. So an activity track is something that dominates the team or the group for a period of time. Now, when they did this research, they marked up all the conversations that these people had. This is in the late 70s that they did this. So they didn't have the power of like digital computers and stuff. So they did it all by hand and typewriters and horrible. So they marked up these conversations and they said, well, sometimes the team's dominated by conversations and kind of work that's in this domain, and other times it's in this domain, and other times it's this domain. And they described it like this. So there's a task process track. So for a while, the team will focus on activities around how you manage stuff and how you do stuff, just the general working. So what's a good example of that? So just solution design, problem analysis are examples of things that you'll do in that domain. Another domain or another track is the relational track, which is where you're managing the relationships around how you do work. So that might be where we're having a frank exchange of views on something. We need to implement something new, and I'm saying it should be done in Scala, and someone else should be saying should be done in .NET, right? So we're just having an argument about the relative merits of those kind of things, but we're at the same time we're trying to work out relationship. We're trying to manage it in a way that it's not offensive. We're not going, you're an idiot because you said Scala, you're a fool because you said .NET. It's about, no, it's okay, these things have merits. Let's work out what the right thing is to do. And then there's a topical track, which is kind of substantive arguments. I guess what I just gave then is also a topical discussion. But, you know, are we talking web, are we talking mobile, for example, responsive design, those kind of broad discussions that you might have that are important. What's the market segment we're trying to get into? It's not going to affect what you're going to do straight away, but it's a broad discussion that you need to have across the team. Pools model says these things happen all the time. They might happen simultaneously. One of them might happen, and then you might switch to another one. Or two might happen. But rather than thinking about we go through a stage of norming and then go to a stage of performing, we go through this kind of work all the time. We behave in this kind of way. When we switch, it's a thing called a breakpoint. And we normally make these switches. It makes sense to switch from planning to action. It makes sense to switch from the beginning of the day to you know, getting on with work, you sit down. Those things are just normal breakpoints. So when it's normal, your group just deals with it and you just roll with it and it's okay. So there's two other breakpoints that are a little less functional. So there's delays. So that might be just some kind of holding pattern for the team. You can't get any work done, you can't get something done. If you work for some of the major corporates in Australia, that's the time when you're trying to start your computer in the morning. Now this can be a difficulty, it can be frustrating. Equally, it can create some degree of creativity. If you have the autonomy to do something different and creative, then delays can be useful. So if you're waiting for your continuous delivery environment and it takes half an hour before you can do something, that delay can make you think, well, how can I make this 15 minutes? Take advantage of it. And then there's disruptions, you know, failures, distractions, you know, things that you didn't expect to happen. The trouble with the disruption is you've got to pull people back into the context and be back on track, back to do what they're meant to be there to do. So we've got these activity tracks, the task track, we've got the relational track, we've got the topical track, things that dominate our conversations and our behaviours, and then we switch between these. And sometimes the switch is okay, and we expect it and we just roll with it. Other times it's inconvenience, painful, and we have to get ourselves back on it. So if you're working with the team, you can be aware of that and help people switch around with it. The last part of Pool's model is the structural requirements. And this is a very broad context for the team. So your teams need to exist for some kind of purpose. They need to be able to develop that interdependence and shared responsibility. And if you don't have that, then the rest of the tracks are going to go a bit weird. So the topical track's going to be, why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? What's the point? Which means you're not going to be that productive. So it's worthwhile just keeping that in mind. Okay, so that's Pool's model. Activity tracks, breakpoints, structure for task accomplishment. So we have Tuchman's model, which is a bunch of nice stages lined up. We also have Pool's model, which is a bunch of stuff that happens in parallel. So if you want to use this model, because why would you be sitting here listening to me if you're not going to try and do something with it? You can just go and get some coffee. It's worthwhile just being aware that there's an alternative. So rather than just having one idea of making sense, you know, if you're a coach and you go and work with that team, they just always seem to be storming. You can sit there and have a listen to it. Maybe something else is going on. Now you've got an alternative way to understand what's happening. More clicky. Okay, listen for the breakpoints. Watch for breakpoints. What's going on? Has there been a disruption? Has there been a delay? What can you do now within your team or within the teams you're working with to help them out? Is it a time to go, well, what can we do differently to get through this situation? Or we need to get back on track because it's been disruptive. Just be aware of that. And equally, if stuff seems to be not going so well, just do something different. Force a breakpoint. Make people make a change. We're spending a lot of time talking about the general idea of why we exist, what we're trying to do, but we're not actually getting on with it, right? Then you can make sense of that. Tuchman's model doesn't necessarily give you that structure, even to wait until you hit performing. Using this model, you go, let's just make it change. So one of the things I did do with this is talk to a team I was working with last year about it, and we just got to scale in a retrospective how we thought we were going on the different tracks, so task, topic and relational. One guy kindly said he was a 1 out of 10 on the task track because he was just doing garbage work and had no value. So we kind of teased some stuff out of it. So you can use this in a different way. So if you have a desire to look at more models, there's Tubbs and Fisher have linear stage models, which is like Tuchman's. Hare has a cyclical model. And Gersick has another model, which is called the punctuated equilibrium model, which those who are going to come to the workshop tomorrow afternoon will get into that one in a little bit more depth. It's a pretty cool model. I like that one. Okay, so that's one. That's a very long one of the 4 things that I'm covering. 4. And we're going to cover the second one, which is motivational effects. And I'm going to have a little drinking. Did any of what I just said make sense? All the stuff about models? Yeah? There's some nodding. That's good. One's good out of 250 or whatever. Okay. So what is motivation? So before we actually talk about it, we'll talk about the context again. I seem to go meta all the time. It's very sad. So here we're just interested in why people do stuff and why people continue to do something. That's just as a general idea around motivation. There's lots of different perspectives on motivations, there's lots of different motivational theories, but really it's about what is it, why are you doing that? And why do you keep doing that? Why am I here talking to you guys? What's my motivation for that? Why do I persist when I can sit down or go and get a cup of coffee? So when we are in groups, when we're in teams, there's effects on our motivation. And these are pretty well researched. And it's worthwhile knowing what these are because when you work with a team and you might want to do something with a team, like put up a task board, why do we have to do that? There's a motivational reason for that. It's not the only reason, but it's a pretty compelling one. And there's all sorts of other things we can talk about. So free writing. Free writing is a well-known, old factor that comes from people working and doing stuff together. Seriously, we've known about this for hundreds of years, I suspect. It's where you get the benefit of the group or the team when you made no contribution. 0, nothing. Now, if there's anybody in this room who is part of the anti-vaccination movement, you are free riding. Because you won't get sick because everyone else has taken a vaccine and they're staying healthy. That's an example of free riding. You haven't had to stress your immune system, but the herd will keep you safe. You're an idiot. Now, beyond the anti-vaccination movement, this happens in workplaces as well. Particularly, you can see this in quite large organisations. And it might be that you have a team that's going really well. So I've got this team over here, they're going fantastic. They're just releasing product all the time. It's completely defect-free. The customers love it. And I'm the VP of something or other. So I start to attach myself to the team. Yeah, I've been closely involved with these guys from the beginning. I selected half of them. Yep. 2 of them are going to marry my children. Right? So I've done nothing. I've made no contribution, but I'm trying to get all the credit for it. I'm partially joking about that. I saw this in 2007 in a big bank in Australia. We had a team that was actually successful for the first time they've had in years. All these managers flocked to it. And then we started giving them work to do, and they all flocked away. So it does happen. Be aware of it. Again, it's a factor in larger situations, and we recommend an Agile. A toned-down version of free writing is called social loafing. And social loafing, it happens a lot, and it's where we kind of reduce our effort when we're working in a group than when we're working by ourselves. And it was found out through kind of physical activity studies, early 1900s, I think. So they do what's called a rope pull experiment, where they have a rope and they have a force meter on the end, and I come up and I pull back on the rope and I pull 100 newtons, and then someone else gets up and they pull back on the rope and they pull 50 newtons because they're a complete weakling, and then the 2 of us pull it up and we both pull on the rope. Now there's no way there can be process loss, but we pull 100 newtons. So we've lost 50 newtons. one of us or both of us is not putting in enough effort to do that. And that's how they first found that. And the scientists, the smart people who do this research, they've replicated that in so many different settings. Anyone who has been to school or university and has done a group assignment know what social loafing is. It's the guy who just doesn't do any of the work or does a little bit. Oh, I'll format it. I'll do the printing. Don't worry about it. I'll nail that for you. So, and it happens a lot. So be aware of it. So 2 negative motivational effects when you're working with teams. Free writing, social loafing. Positive effect, which is great. I say COLA because in Australia we speak English and we speak no other language. Actually, that's not true. Australia has the most diverse language culture in any country in the world, but most of us only speak one language. I mostly speak English. So the COLA effect is a motivational gain rather than a motivational loss. And again, it was found out through exercise studies, and again, it's been replicated in the workplace and other sorts of environments as well. So what I started with was giving someone a weight. This isn't a weight. And you just got to stand there and hold it. And maybe I'm standing there and I'm holding it, and after 5 minutes, my arm starts to drop, and eventually it just drops. Cuts a little cord. We work out Lachlan can hold this, I don't know, 100-gram weight for a couple of minutes. And then we get someone else and they can do it. We find out how long they can do it for. Maybe they can do it for a bit longer than me. Maybe we both about 5 minutes. And then we do it together. And it gets to about 4.5 minutes and I'm going, and it gets to 5 minutes and I'm going, and it's 6 minutes, 7 minutes. So all of a sudden I've managed to go a bit further than I supposedly could beforehand. And that's the essence of this effect, is that when you're working with other people, you compare yourself to them and you don't want to be the worst player. This is a generalization. Some people don't give a stuff. But for the most part, most people don't want to be at the bottom. And the COLA effect pulls people off the bottom and it makes them do a bit better than they're actually capable of doing if they were doing it by themselves. So it's kind of a reverse social loafing effect. But it works when you know there's someone else there. They don't actually have to be there, so it works virtually as well. So if I'm there holding this weight and you tell me there's someone in another room who's holding it as well, I'll push myself harder. But you just have to know that there's some kind of social comparison. Okay, so if you want to get these positive effects and you don't want to have the negative effects, so you want to get some COLA, team size is a big, big impact. So the bank I was talking about where we had all the managers flock in, I think I wrote down on the first day we had 28 people at the stand-up. And someone told me that wasn't the full team. It's like, who are you kidding? So we got to 45, and then eventually got rid of people. But the team size is a big effect because you can't see what's going on. You don't know everyone on the team. So it'll be okay, I'll have a bit of a lazy day, I'll come in a bit late because no one knows where I am or where I'm working, and I won't do so much, and I'll have a long lunch, and then I'll leave early because no one knows you, no one sees you. So team size has an impact. Keep your teams small so you get high visibility of the work that's going on. Curiously enough, research has demonstrated that if you hire people with a strong personal work ethic, they work harder. Crazy, isn't it? If you hire people who are tall, they can reach higher. But we've done this for a while. Build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and support they need and trust them to get the job done. Right? We know this, but it's worthwhile testing. Part of your interview process, part of your selection process can tap into this. So if you're hiring a developer, what do they do in their spare time? Do they play with code? Do they go to code jams and dojos and that kind of stuff? Do they go, oh yeah, I spent last night looking at Rust. And you go, what? And then you find out it's a language and you go, oh, that's pretty cool, right? So you've got someone who's really interested in this. They want to get stuff done. See if it translates to the workplace. How does that work in the workplace? So you can find people who have this ethic, and it's really useful. Show individual contributions. I know I'm talking about teamwork, but teams are individuals. And this is why I like visual management. So when I was here, 2010, did anyone come here in 2010? Yep. So I gave a talk on visual management. I really passionately believe in it. So stick stuff up on walls, stick pictures of people on the stuff on the walls. don't use abstract stuff. So don't have Lachlan as the chair. Have a cartoon version of Lachlan or a real version of Lachlan. It has an effect, and you'll see what's going on. I'm not talking about individual measurement. I'm not talking about individual KPIs. I'm talking about showing the individual contribution. Because one of the things we like is a degree of equitability, and this fires that up. And co-locate people. Stick them really close together so you can see this interaction and see what's going on. So this kind of blurry team down here which got stuck in a meeting room in Melbourne. Right? They can see what's going on, they can control the visual management, they have that great opportunity to play off each other. Another thing is to create some cohesion in your team, create some identity, create some belief in the team, create some desire in the team. Great way to do that is to be successful. So easy to do. Other things to do is just get to know each other. Take people, go out to lunch together, go out and have a drink, play some sport. Just do something to get that identity going. People will start to work better for each other. Avoid busy work. That might be an Australianism. That means work that doesn't really create any value. Yak shaving. Do you guys know what yak shaving is? No. I'm not going to explain it to you. Write down yak shaving and then look up yak shaving. You'll then, trust me, by the end of next week, you'll be describing things as yak shaving. Avoid it. Just do essential stuff. Do necessary stuff. People get more motivated. They get more interested. They will, get fired up. Okay. So we've covered a non-linear development model in Pool. We've covered some motivational effects in team. So we're halfway, but the sizing's wrong, so I think we're over halfway. And this didn't work. Now, this is a really neat bit of research that a woman in the United States did, and every time I read her stuff, I get jealous that I didn't get a chance to ever do it. She's done some really superb research. And this is looking at what happens when teams are outcome-focused versus process-focused. If you are an agile coach, this is important. If you're doing an agile transformation, this is important. So what do we mean? Process, how members coordinate and combine physical efforts and resources into a product. And the outcome is the intended final products or the results of the team's work. So what we're trying to achieve versus how we're trying to achieve that might be a breakdown for you. The focus is the temporal precedence. Doesn't that sound great? So it's what we do over time. So process-focused teams prioritise their process over the outcome that they want. Outcome-focused teams allow outcomes, the results they're trying to achieve, to take precedence over the process. The process will change because they're focused on what they're trying to do. I'm probably talking somewhat abstract now. Roll with it. I'll explain everything in a second. So, where you have a complex, open-ended task, where which will benefit from the creation and combination of new ideas or knowledge, outcome-focused teams will be more successful than process-focused teams. If that is not software development, I don't know what is. This is making new products. Where it's complex, it's open-ended, we need to create new ideas, we need to combine new ideas. What we need to be is focused on the outcome we're trying to create and not the process that we're trying to create. And that is the essence of things like Scrum. Scrum is about the product increment. It's about building this product. It's not necessarily about having a great daily Scrum. We think that's the process by which you can get there, but the goal is to create something of value. Focus on the outcome, don't focus on the process. So, complex changing environments where we need to have better ways to do stuff. Teams that are very process-focused are at a disadvantage. Anyone who's worked on a large agile change program of over 500 people plus will see environments where they're really process-focused. We have always used this process to do our product development. Now you've given us agile, whatever flavour it is, we follow the new process. You still get the same crap. You just get a different label. You need to focus on the outcome. Outcome-focused teams have an advantage when something's complex, when the results are going to be difficult to determine to start with. And it's pretty easy to become process-focused. So sometimes you need to have a lot of detail in what you're doing. You need to have a lot of checks and balances. Maybe you're working on medical devices. So if I get a pacemaker, I want to make sure you guys have done a good job. I want to make sure it's all being checked off. One of the big Scrum companies in Australia is Cochlear. Do you guys know what I mean when I say Cochlear? The bionic ear. So those guys they use Scrum. But they have to go through some really nasty processes. But they still use an agile approach because they're focused on the outcome and they let the process come with that. And that's where you want to be process focused. But for the most part, that's not how we do Agile, it's not how we do software. Right? We can't predict what we're going to do. The technology changes too rapidly, the market changes too rapidly. We have to, dare I say it, inspect and adapt and try to get to whatever our vision is. Task complexity can lead us to be process focused. So if you have a favourite way of solving a problem, that can lead you down that path of process. I've worked with a friend of mine who's a very experienced manager, has a preferred way of doing strategy. And he'll just go, right, let's do this. There's strategy. Well, there's the process of strategy. That's not necessarily the strategy. Now, I'm not maligning him. He understands that as well. But other people will go, well, I've done the process. Tick the boxes. There's the strategy. Also, strangely enough, this is part of the research and it's a bit weird. The desire to get stuff done can lead you to be process focused over outcome focused. And that's this kind of idea of not all movement is progress. So quick, let's get on with stuff, let's allocate some tasks, let's put together a race here and just get moving. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're heading towards the outcome you want. You can just be focused on getting work done rather than what's the goal that we're trying to achieve. So, let's switch it around the other way. You want to be outcome focused. Trust me, it's better for you. 9 out of 10 doctors agree. So, watch how you start off with a team. If you start off with something like a work breakdown structure, you're looking at the process. If you start defining roles and responsibilities, if you start hammering out a schedule, you're looking at a process. Maybe start by looking at the goal. What's the vision? What are we trying to hit? What's the vibe? The other thing they've found through the research is that you can send different cues to your environment. So, depending on where you are and what you see depends on how you behave. And that's what I mean by a cue in this situation. You're all neatly sitting in rows because there's rows set out and you're here to listen to people talk. You didn't come and sit on the stage. So there's a cue in this environment that says sit in the seat. I'm using a microphone because there's one here, I'm giving a talk, that's a cue. Now you can give those kind of cues out in environments as well. So if you have the Agile Change poster on the wall and says that we will always do user stories and stand-ups always at 9 o'clock in the morning and they'll only go 15 minutes no matter what, then you're starting to send these cues that means you might miss the outcome. You get a bit too process focused. Just be aware. And if you see it and you've listened to this talk and you don't think I'm talking crap, intervene. Do something. Right? Just make a change. Make a change that makes us focus on the outcome. We're doing a stand-up. Why are we doing the stand-up? Okay, so everyone's done this little reporting. We haven't changed our plan. Are we going to be successful in this iteration? I don't know. I've got no information on that. What's the outcome of something like a stand-up? Make it change and get to what you want out of it. But just do something. Start to send different cues in the environment you're in. Okay, there's only one to go. We're 75% there, and I think my time is slightly out. No one's trying to drag me off the stage, so that's great. I hope you're all getting this. Does this make sense? It makes lots of sense to me, but I've given this talk before. Okay, so non-linear development model, motivation effects, process versus outcome focus. You've got 3 things to now work with your teams. I'm going to talk about leadership. This gets a little weird, but I think it makes sense at the end. If it doesn't make sense at the end, Cesario promised me that he'll explain it to you later. Okay, we already talked about individuals in the team. The more I started looking at teams and what people had studied around teams, and that's a lot louder, isn't it? Wow. One of the things that it got me thinking about is if we take these people away, remove everyone from the team, we don't have a team anymore. It ceases to exist. So the team only comes together when the people come together. But at the same time, when people are doing stuff separately, when I'm sitting down at my desk doing something, I can still be contributing to the team. So rather than a thing in itself, maybe the team is about the actions that I take and the interactions that we have when we're together and working. So rather than the chair, the koala thing, being an entity, maybe the team is about this interaction. Maybe it's this space in between us rather than this actual thing that is out there. Did that get too weird? Yep. Okay, no nodding. So as we work towards a common goal, our interactions are what makes the team, and our activities. Hold on to that. So in that environment, we think about who leads, because we're talking about leadership. How do we know a person is a leader in our team, right? So in corporate life, it's going to be the person's haircut, their salary, they're wearing a suit, someone's got a tie, they're a leader. In Australia, you're a male, your title. It's funny, but it's also sad. Look at the stats on top companies with women CEOs and see how they perform in comparison to men, and then try and justify why men are CEOs. That's just coincidence. Okay, so if we don't think about those things, these labels, these external things that are easy to see, maybe the people you see as leaders is because of the action that they take, as an alternative perspective. So maybe it's not a role, maybe it's not a title, maybe it's not a gender, or maybe it's not a tie, maybe it's a behaviour. So we think of teams as interactions. So rather than the team X being that thing over there, team X is this stuff that these people do. And maybe we think about leaders as people who actually take action. Then leadership isn't a position anymore. It's not a title, it's something else. So this is one definition of millions of definitions of leadership. So leadership occurs in the face of adaptive challenges, that is, problems that require learning or innovation or new patterns of behaviour. This kind of sounds like something I'd said just before. So leadership is no longer the thing, the person. It's this action that takes place. So anyone, now, if you think of it that way, and if you think of a team that way, anyone can be a leader. Anyone leads, because leadership is the change in performance within the team. So instead of being the free rider who attaches himself to this team, I actually work with these guys and actually see that, well, they're a bit of a Wi-Fi dead zone in the office, and I've got the budget controlled, so I just go and buy another router and plug it in, and I improve what's going on for them. That can be an example of leadership. Simple things like that, even though I'm not really associated with the team, actually make stuff better. That performance improvement is what we're talking about. Now, if you are a coach or a manager, then your role is to give people the tools to do this. Sorry, I need a drink. Maybe that's there, that might be easier. So you need to reframe leadership. You need to not look for individuals who are team leaders, you need to look for these events, these moments. And then you need to make more of them happen. And you can do that by fostering interaction, by getting people to be more interactive and working more closely together, because this leadership happens through the participation in this environment. So if your team is separated, they're not doing a lot of stuff together, you see them if you're using Scrum, and you see them in the Scrum events, but you don't see them in between. Try and get them together in between those events. Try and get them coordinating a lot more. That gives this opportunity. And then you want to foster some interdependency. You want to know these people have strong reliance on each other to achieve some better goal. And then you want to make sure that the quality of this interdependency is high. So you want to make sure that it's good, it's clean, we know we're trying to work together, we're trying to achieve something good, we're not trying to shoot each other down. And then the funnest, toughest thing to do is to try and hold on to adaptive tension. So this is where we're trying to do something we haven't done before and it's not quite working. And what we want to do is retreat back to where we were before and how comfortable it was. As a leader in an organisation, as a manager, as any person, what you can do is help your team stay in that state where it's unpleasant for a little while longer in an attempt to move through it and get to a better performance level, get to a better happiness level, get to whatever it is you're trying to achieve. This is hard. This is the hard part about leadership. But because we are not saying the leader is you, we're saying the leadership is all of us, and it's the actions we take, you can do this. So I think if you want to have a team environment where you think of leadership as adaptive changes, you probably need to be more outcome focused. So you need to be able to move away from your process to try and hit your goal. And you need to be able to support the team to do that, and that can be an adaptive tension. You need to be motivated to do that as well, and you want the people around you to be motivated to do that. But I also think you need to be able to dynamically shift what you're doing in your team. You need to know that we should be talking about this, or maybe we should talk about that. It's time to deal with the conflict that we have. It's time for us to deal with why we exist as a team, and know how to make those changes and shift those around. And I think that requires us to think differently about teams. I think it requires us to have more ideas about teams. But it's also possibly the other way around. And I think if we think about leadership in a different way, and we think about leadership being adaptive improvements, then this is going to make us think differently about teams. So if we stop thinking about leaders being the person with the tie, the person who's got the title, and we think about change, then the way you think about teams needs to be different. Which is why I think it's worthwhile having more things to think about, which is why I gave you 4 things to think about. Thank you.
Hi, we have time for 2 or 3 questions. Anyone?
We talked about teams, and one of the things you said was about relocation and working together. What do you think about teams that are geographically disparate and cannot be relocated? Is it possible to create a team in that conditions?
Yes, but it's really, really, really hard. Would you like the koala for asking the first question? Because he looks like you. It's got that beard thing happening. Yeah, so it's possible, but it's hard. I think the first thing you have to do is honestly, you have to have these people together, and then you can work apart. There is some research around that, and I've been starting to look more on what they call virtual teams, so distributed nature. Social loafing can increase, so you need a way to avoid that. So there's a company in Melbourne, in Australia, that has an offshore office in China, and what they do is they have like a constant playing video of both offices in each other's office so they know what's going on. That's how you can see everyone there, and you need to have that connection. And you need to have the personal connections to generate the bonds, the interdependency and the responsibility that we get for each other. So I know that you're here in Porto and I'm in Sydney, but we're working for each other and we're trying to achieve the same goal. And that comes from spending just a bit of time together. Maybe a week, maybe a month. And once we get that, then repeat that a few times. So the guys in Melbourne were telling me that their China office doesn't save them any money at all. They opened an office in China because we have about 20 million people in Australia. There's a few more people in China. But we ran out of Ruby developers in Melbourne. They just couldn't hire people who could code well. I can code Ruby. Scary, don't look at it. So they wanted good people. So what they had to do is open in China because they have more people. And it doesn't save them money because they're flying backwards and forwards to maintain that team coordination and that desire to work for each other. So I think it's possible. You've got to work hard. I hope that answers your question.
One more question? Anyone? Don't be shy.
Anybody? Bueller.
You mentioned that to actually define a leader in the team should be actually defining, and I think that is a little bit unrealistic. Isn't that so? In a real company, at least.
So the leader of the team should not be defined?
Yes.
Well, no, I don't think it's unrealistic. I think so. There's a thing called fundamental attribution error. I'll say that again. Fundamental attribution error, also called correspondence bias, and that's where we think people control their own actions, whereas we're environmentally controlled. And I think one of the impacts of that is we have this thing called the great person theory of leadership, where we go, Winston Churchill, everyone should be a leader like Winston Churchill, or everyone should be like Steve Jobs. But that's not actually true, and we kind of translate that to the microcosm of our workplace, which means that we've got these 4 people here, and they need a team lead, so let's put Lachlan in there to coordinate it. Now, a place I've been working this year did that, and they got rid of it because they realised what happened was these guys just started doing what the lead said, they stopped being autonomous, they stopped doing their own work, and it just got more and more dysfunctional because everything sort of sat within this person who came in as the lead. A lot of organisations still do that. A lot of organisations still go, span of control should be a maximum of 7 people or whatever it is, which means that once we've got that, they have to have a team lead. And they put that in place. That is classic, early 20th century manufacturing management structure, and it can work, but it doesn't really work when you're doing something that's creative or requires knowledge. Now, you can still have a leader who might be a technical leader, or might be a people leader, and people sit in that role. And I'm quite happy to reward people for that kind of span of responsibility and for that effort. So it might be a case of, you find that there's one person who's just like really good with people. Expand their role into letting them do that and let them develop people. Pay them a bit more cash. You don't have to put the label on them. You don't go, you are now the people leader. You go, no, you're really good with people. How can we change the way we work to support that? Do you want to do that? And the same thing, I think in our industry we see a lot with technicians. We go, actually this guy really solves problems in a really smart way. How can we get that across multiple teams without necessarily making them a lead? It's possible, it's hard, people will still fall back on a hierarchical structure, but that doesn't mean you have to accept it. Go and look at what Zappos is doing. I mean, what the hell? They actually offered people money. They said, we will pay you for 3 months to quit your job because if you stay, you have no manager. So if you don't want to have a manager, then stay. But if you think you need to have a manager, then you're going to have to go somewhere else, and we're willing to pay you to get rid of you to do that. That's a pretty weird exception, but I think it's an example of a possibility.
Last question.
Hey, so good presentation. I just want to talk regarding the teams being together. Do you think it's an advantage or not to have the product team really sitting together with the development team? Or they should be like in the same area but a bit separated, so they don't interrupt the development process all the time?
Am I allowed to just say yes to that question?
But yes, what? They should be like sitting completely together, or make sense to have them a bit separated?
Both can work and both can be completely dysfunctional. It's the quality of those interactions that matter. So a very small company I've been working with this year does like it's pretty small, and they have the development team and the product team right next to each other. And for some parts of the organisation, some teams that works and some teams it doesn't. It depends on the people in the development team and it depends on the people on the product team. And what needs to happen is they need to understand the interactions that they're having and what impact that has further downstream. So if I keep interrupting you, you can't get the thing done. Is it done yet? Is it done? Have you done that? I actually don't like the way you've written that. Can you write that differently? Right? So that's going to stop you doing useful work. But if you keep hassling me going, do you really think that's the most important thing for us to do right now? I mean, really, if we go down the backlog, this thing that you've got scheduled for 2 months' time, let's do that now. Right? So then I'm not going to be able to work well. So that interaction, I think, is the key to making that work. And both situations can work, but I would generally say be closer together than further apart. Have a look at the Allen curve, I think it is, which is the communication distance curve. Basically, if you're more than 10 metres apart, you're not really communicating. You might send each other emails. So get together, look at the way you're interacting. If it's not working well, get someone to come in and help you. Get a facilitator in, get a coach in for a couple of weeks and just learn to have better interactions, and then it should work. So I would say close is better, learn to work together.
Okay, thank you. We are short on time, so if you want to ask more questions to Lachlan, please go and talk to Lachlan at the coffee break after lunchtime. He's here all the day.
I am here all
thank you,
day.
Lachlan.
Thank you.